Hey everyone, I'm Eliza, an ex-Amish girl from Pennsylvania, and today I want to have an honest conversation about something that's complicated and polarizing. Amish intimacy rules. Are they oppressive, or could there actually be something genius about them? I know that's a bold question, but hear me out. I've lived on both sides of this fence, and I think the answer is more nuanced than you might expect. Let me start by saying that when I was growing up Amish, intimacy was not something we talked about, ever. There was no sex education in our schools, none. Parents didn't sit you down and explain anything about your body, about relationships, about what to expect. You learned by piecing things together from watching farm animals, from whispered conversations with friends your age, and from whatever you could figure out on your own. And honestly, that silence created a lot of confusion and shame around something that should be natural. The Amish believe that sex is strictly reserved for marriage and that it's meant primarily for procreation. Having children, that's the purpose. The idea of sex for pleasure, for connection, for intimacy beyond making babies, that's not really part of the conversation. And before marriage, physical contact is extremely limited. I'm talking no holding hands in public, no kissing where anyone can see you, definitely no touching beyond what's absolutely necessary. The Amish believe that love should be private, that showing affection publicly is immodest and inappropriate. So let's talk about what happens when you get married, because that's where things get interesting. On your wedding night, you're expected to know what to do despite having zero education about it. Most Amish couples spend their wedding night at the bride's parents' house, and the next day they're up early helping clean up from the wedding. There's no romantic honeymoon getaway. Instead, you spend the next few months visiting relatives, and that's when you receive most of your wedding gifts. It's practical, it's community-focused, but it's not exactly what you'd call intimate in the way the outside world understands intimacy. Now here's where I want to pause and acknowledge something. There is a concept in Amish marriage that on the surface might seem genius. The idea of unified authority and clearly defined roles. The husband is considered the head of the household, and the wife is expected to submit to his leadership. This comes straight from the Bible, from Ephesians, where Paul tells wives to submit to their husbands as to the Lord. And in theory, if both people accept their roles and the husband is considerate and loving, this can create a stable, secure environment. There's no power struggle, no constant negotiation about who's in charge. Everyone knows their place, and that clarity can reduce conflict. I've seen Amish marriages where this works, where the husband makes decisions but genuinely listens to his wife's input, where submission doesn't mean the woman has no voice, but rather that she trusts her husband to lead with her best interests at heart. In those marriages, there's a sense of partnership within the structure. The wife manages the home, raises the children, and has authority in her sphere. The husband makes the big decisions, provides for the family, and represents them in the community, and both people feel valued. But here's the problem. That only works if the husband is a good man. If he's abusive, controlling, or selfish, submission becomes subjection, and the wife has very little recourse. Divorce is not an option in Amish culture. It's simply not allowed. Separation is incredibly difficult and brings shame on the family. So if a woman is being emotionally, verbally, or physically abused, she's trapped. And the culture of submission tells her that her role is to endure, to forgive, to be patient, to pray harder. She's taught that speaking up against her husband is unchristlike, that she needs to be more submissive, that maybe if she just tried harder, things would get better. I knew women in my community who lived like this, who suffered in silence because leaving wasn't an option and speaking up was seen as rebellion. And what's even worse is that their daughters watched this and learned that this is what marriage looks like, that a woman's value is in her obedience, that love means enduring pain without complaint, and their sons learned that men have authority over women, that a wife's job is to submit no matter what. That cycle repeats itself generation after generation. Now let's talk about the intimacy rules themselves, the no public affection, the privacy around everything related to sex and relationships. Is there something to be said for keeping intimacy private? Maybe. In the modern world, we're bombarded with hypersexualized content constantly. Relationships are performed on social media. Physical affection is currency for likes and validation. And maybe there's something valuable about believing that what happens between two people is sacred and private, not something to be broadcast or used for attention. The Amish approach to modesty and privacy around intimacy means that your relationship isn't being judged or compared by outsiders. You're not competing with anyone else's highlight reel. There's no pressure to perform or prove anything. And in a weird way, that can create space for genuine connection without outside interference. I can see the appeal of that, especially now that I've lived in the modern world where everything is on display. But here's where it becomes oppressive: the silence, the shame, the complete lack of education. When you're taught that your body is something to be hidden and never discussed, when you go into marriage with zero understanding of what healthy intimacy looks like, when you're told that sex is only for making babies and not for mutual pleasure and connection, that's not sacred. That's damaging. It creates marriages where women feel used rather than loved, where intimacy is a duty rather than a joy, where both people are fumbling in the dark, literally and figuratively, trying to figure out something they've been taught is too shameful to even talk about. And let's be real about the whole unified authority thing. Yes, in an ideal world where men are kind and wise and always act in their family's best interest, having one decision maker could work. But we don't live in an ideal world. And when you set up a system where one person has all the power and the other person is taught to always submit, you create the perfect conditions for abuse. Not because all Amish men are abusers, but because the structure protects those who are and silences those who suffer. I think the genius part, if there is one, is the emphasis on commitment. When divorce isn't an option, couples have to find ways to work through problems. They can't just walk away when things get hard. And that forced commitment can sometimes lead to deeper understanding and growth, but it can also trap people in unbearable situations with no way out. So is that genius, or is it just control disguised as commitment? Here's what I've learned since leaving. Healthy intimacy requires education, communication, and equality. You need to understand your own body and your partner's body. You need to be able to talk openly about what you want, what you need, what feels good, and what doesn't. And you need to feel like you have equal say in the relationship, that your voice matters just as much as your partner's. None of that exists in traditional Amish marriages. The Amish intimacy rules are built on a foundation of biblical literalism, patriarchy, and the belief that human desires need to be controlled and suppressed. And while there might be small pieces of wisdom buried in there, the emphasis on privacy, the value of commitment, the overall system is oppressive. It's oppressive to women especially, but also to men who might not fit the mold of the authoritative head of household. It's oppressive to anyone who wants more from their marriage than just following prescribed roles. So to answer the question I posed at the beginning, are Amish intimacy rules oppressive or genius? They're overwhelmingly oppressive, with maybe tiny fragments of wisdom that get completely overshadowed by the harm. The silence creates shame. The submission creates vulnerability to abuse. The lack of education creates confusion and dysfunction. And the rigid roles prevent people from experiencing intimacy as true partnership. Could there be a middle ground? Could you take the Amish emphasis on privacy and commitment and combine it with modern ideas about education, communication, and equality? Maybe. But that's not what exists in Amish communities. What exists is a system that prioritizes control over connection, obedience over authenticity, and tradition over the actual well-being of the people living under these rules. I don't regret leaving. I don't regret learning that intimacy can be healthy, that relationships can be equal, that talking openly about sex and desire and connection isn't shameful, it's necessary. And I don't regret questioning the rules I was raised with instead of just accepting them, because that's how it's always been done. If you're someone who's struggling in an Amish marriage, who feels like you have no voice, who's being told that submission means accepting mistreatment, I want you to know that's not what love is supposed to look like. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be respected. And you deserve to make your own choices about your life and your body. Thanks for listening to this discussion. I know it's complicated, and I know people will have different opinions, but I think it's important to be honest about both the appeal and the dangers of these rules instead of just romanticizing Amish life or completely dismissing it. The truth is always more complicated than the stereotypes.